Okay, let me open up my chat so I can see all the wonderful people coming in today. There we go. Oh, well, welcome everyone. Happy to have everyone here. Feel free to drop us a line in the chat. Love to hear from you. Excited to have Jessica with us today. Welcome, Jessica. We'll give everyone just a couple minutes to get in before we get started here. But let's just see what we got here. We got Ronnie here saying hi. Good to be here. Welcome, Ronnie. Happy to have you. Carla from LA and Floaty. Good afternoon. Good to see you. Good in Floaty. Trey from Florida. Nina from Ireland. James from San Diego, California. Anna from, oh man, I can't even keep up anymore. Great. Welcome, everyone. This is great. Perfect. I just love seeing so many people from all over the world jumping in here. It's great. So much
Same.
fun.
It's so cool. Hello, everybody.
Oh, let's see here. Woohoo. Happy New Year. Yes. That's great. I love to see that. Sometimes I forget. I feel like I'm already so deeply entrenched into what I'm doing this year. I've forgotten that the year just started. So yes, welcome and happy New Year, everyone. That's so true. We are just starting out the year. This is great. It's 5 a.m. Here in Korea. Wow, but excited to be here. Welcome and happy to have you from Korea. That's exciting.
Thanks
Yeah,
for
it's
getting up so early for us.
yeah. I always appreciate anyone who's willing to get up early and come because that takes effort. That takes a lot of work. I'm a night owl, and so for me, staying up late is easy, but getting up early, oh, so tough, so tough. Oh, let's see. Oh, okay, looking good. Okay, well, we've got about half of the people we have registered here so far. So that's really good. That's great. I'm glad to see that. A lot of familiar names I'm seeing here and some new ones too. If this is your first session with me, I'd love to give me a shout out. I'd love to hear you. And of course, if this is like your 10th or 50th or whatever, let me know. I love to see people coming again and I love to have new faces, and that's always great. Fuzzy, is it Fuzzy? If I butcher your name, I'm sorry, but she's the first one. This is her first one. Great. Oh wow, this is great. New to you, Oliver. Familiar with Jessica? Great. Kim, happy to have you. This is my first. Anna says, Brad, first one. Brad first. Rick. Okay, great. So we got a lot of people who are new here. Second time, Gary. Who? Yes, Gary. I've seen you. That's great. So, oh, great. This is wonderful. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We're about 5 minutes after the hour. This is kind of how our format will go. I have a few slides we'll get started with, and I'll turn the time over to Jessica. So let me go ahead and get started with that real quick, and we'll get on our way. Here, let me make sure I share. And hopefully everyone can see that, and we'll just get started right away. So I'm really excited to welcome everyone to our January webinar series brought to you by the creative minds behind Scrivener and Scapple Literature Latte. I'm Oliver Evanson, your host for today, bringing you insights drawn from over 15 years of writing and Scrivener expertise. And whether you're a seasoned author or just starting out your writing adventures, our webinars are designed with your needs in mind. And today I'm really excited that we'll be exploring revising your novel with author and guest speaker Jessica Brody. So a few items of business real quick. For those of you who wish to revisit today's session or share it with a fellow writer, this webinar is being recorded and you will find the replay on my YouTube channel tomorrow, and you can also enjoy it ad-free next week in the Literature Latte webinar library. And links will be provided shortly, so stay tuned for that. Now, I just want to go real quick, give us a quick outline of what our schedule is for today. To begin, I'll just provide a quick introduction to Jessica, who she is, what she does, and then I'll turn the time over to her for her presentation. After Jessica has finished her presentation, I'll provide you all with a ton of great resources from Jessica, myself, and Literature Latte, which you can utilize to deepen your understanding of Scrivener and improve your writing skills. We'll also leave some ample time at the end for our Q&A, where Jessica and I will do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible. So without further ado, I'm very excited to announce author and guest speaker Jessica Brody. Jessica is the author of the #1 best-selling novel writing guides, Save the Cat Writes a Novel and Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel, and founder of Writing Mastery Academy, which is dedicated to helping fiction writers unlock their full potential. She has also written over 20 novels for teens, tweens, and adults, including The Geography of Lost Things, The Chaos of Standing Still, A Week of Mondays, 52 Reasons to Hate My Father, A Amelia Gray is Almost Okay, the Unremembered Trilogy, and the System Divine series, which is a sci-fi reimagining of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, co-written with Joanne Rendell. Now, her books have been translated and published in over 20 languages, and several have been optioned for film and television. She lives with her husband and 3 dogs near Portland, Oregon. You can visit her online at jessicabrody.com or writingmastery.com, or and follow her on Twitter or Instagram. So, welcome, Jessica. The time is yours.
Thank you so much, Oliver, and thank you everyone who came to see us today. I'm very excited to share all of my strategies for revising. Let me get my screen going here. All right, so in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about how to revise your novel using the Save the Cat method. Okay, so today what we're going to do is, as I just said, we're going to revise our novel using the Save the Cat method. So before I get into that, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview about how I came across the Save the Cat method and what exactly it is for anybody who's new to the method or just needs a quick refresher. Well, this is me about, I don't know, 20 years ago. It's actually not me. It's a stock photo that looks a lot like me 20 years ago. But I was very frustrated trying to sell my first novel. I had written it, I was trying to get an agent, and I was getting rejected all over town. And strangely enough, the rejections kind of sounded very similar. A lot of them really said, you are a good writer, but you have no story. And this really confused me because I was like, what do you mean I don't have a story? I have 500 pages of story. I can print them out and put it on my desk. I didn't really understand what a story was, is what I learned from this process. And that's when I found this book, Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need. It was originally a screenwriting method. And I read it and I thought, I think this could work for novels too. I feel like this structure thing is kind of universal. And what Blake Snyder laid out in his original book for screenwriters, I went and tried to apply to my own novel that I was trying to get represented and published. I ended up selling that novel, getting an agent, selling that novel to a major publisher. And as Oliver said, I've since sold over 20 novels since, and I've been published by major houses like Simon & Schuster, Random House, Macmillan. So this got me thinking, like, okay, so this method really worked for me. Would it work for all novelists? Like, would it be able to be applied to any novel? And that's when I started to dig a little deeper, and I ended up writing these 2 guides, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which does exactly that. It teaches novelists how to use this screenwriting method that's been around for quite a while and that a lot of screenwriters and directors use, and apply it to the process of writing a novel. Because what I found in my research was that novels are structured like a story. Screenplays are structured like a story. So essentially what the Save the Cat method does is it helps us understand how stories work and how to structure them to get the best reading experience for our readers. So here's what I found when I was researching. I had to read a lot of novels to write these Save the Cat guides, like a lot of novels. That was the bulk of the work of writing these books, was just reading a bunch of books and analyzing them. And what I found was that hidden inside every great story, every great novel from the beginning of time to now, there is a secret code underneath. So I read all different genres. This is just a nice little sampling. I read thrillers like The Girl on the Train. I read Stephen King. I read young adult romance like Everything, Everything. I read classics like The Grapes of Wrath, and I read middle grade fantasy like Percy Jackson. And I found that around the 10% mark of all of these stories, there was a very big life-changing event that happened. I also found that around 20% of the way through all these stories, the hero tried something new or went somewhere new, entered a new world, essentially. I found that around 50% of the way through all of these stories, there was a major turning point that twisted the plot and changed the direction of the story. And I found that around 75% or 3/4 of the way through all of these books, the hero or the main character hit rock bottom. And then around 85% of the way through all these stories, the hero found some kind of solution and entered another new world in order to fix the problem and enact that solution. So that's either a really strange coincidence or I had stumbled upon what I call the secret storytelling code that is hidden inside all great novels. And it's the same code that Blake Snyder found in screenplays and movies. I found it in novels as well. And so when Blake Snyder created the Save the Cat method way back when, he actually gave these very universal story points. He gave them names. He called them beats, and he gave them names like the catalyst, the break into two, the midpoint, the all is lost, the break into three, and there's 10 more where that came from. So this is essentially the heart of the Save the Cat method. It's a storytelling code that has been buried within stories from the beginning of storytelling, and Save the Cat just helps us codify that code and actually gives us names and a language with which we can speak about it, and that helps us implement it and apply it to our own stories. So the Save the Cat method, I like to think of it as a structure blueprint. If you think of it, you need a blueprint to build a house, you need a blueprint to tell a good story. So it's a series of plot points that can be found in every great story ever told. And if we use that blueprint to write and revise our own novels, we can tell a great story as well. It's also a transformation machine. If you've ever heard the words, your story or your hero must transform, or you must have a compelling story arc, this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about an imperfect hero goes into the story, and a less imperfect hero comes out of the story. We are using the Save the Cat method, this blueprint, to transform heroes. And all good stories should be about transformation, and this helps us track that transformation to make sure we're doing it in a really compelling way. So the Save the Cat method at the heart is what we call the Save the Cat beat sheet. It's 3 acts and 15 beats or plot points, 5 of which you already now have a hint at, that make your story more compelling. If we use these 15 beats to craft our novel, our story will automatically have really, really solid pacing. We'll be able to hold our readers' attention through the end and leave our readers feeling satisfied. So that all sounds pretty good, right? Let's see how we can do it. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to introduce you to all the 15 beats because I'm kind of crunched on time. I'm not going to be able to go into huge detail on each of the beats, but I will give you some resources at the end on how you can dive deeper into these beats. And today, because we're using this as a revision method and not a plotting or a writing method, we're going to be using those beats as checkpoints of our revision, essentially making sure that the draft we're revising has all of the things that these beats should have. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can use these beats to build a revision plan. And I'm going to walk you through it step by step, how you could build this plan using actually one of my own novel revisions. And you'll see how you can actually implement this plan right in Scrivener if you use Scrivener. All right. So at the very end, I'll give you a link to download my free Save the Cat starter kit. This is going to give you that overview of the beats plus examples from popular novels, so you can really go deeper with the beats and find out how they apply to stories that you already know. This will help you understand the beats more in case you're leaving today feeling like you want a little bit more about the beats. If you're already familiar with the beats, you'll be able to just really focus on the revision plan part of today's presentation. But if you want to dig deeper into the beat sheet, I will definitely give you some resources to do that. All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to actually plant the Save the Cat beat sheet on a storyboard. And I love to use storyboards to revise my novels. It really helps me zoom out and see the full picture of what I'm dealing with. So we're going to be dividing our story into 3 acts, or actually they're more like 4 acts, because we have Act 1, Act 2A, which is the first part of Act 2, Act 2B, and then the final Act 3. And like I said, this is a visual representation of a storyboard that you can absolutely replicate in Scrivener. All right, so here's how it's going to work. Each beat slide looks like this. You'll see along the top where we are in the full beat sheet. At the end of each beat, I'm going to plant it on the storyboard so you can see how it fits into the entire picture. And so you'll see the name of the beat up top so you don't get lost. And then on the side, you're going to see also the name of the beat plus roughly where it goes in your story with that little percentage mark there. So 1% means it's the first percent of your story. The easiest math to explain that is if you're writing a 100-page story, this is 1 page of your story, and so on and so forth. Now, you'll also see that the beats are going to be labeled with single scene or multi-scene. Now, that just means that this beat only takes place in one scene, meaning you get one scene to do your opening image, and then you're done. There will be beats that are multiple scenes, which means you will have multiple scenes in order to get through everything that you need to get through in that beat. So let's dive in. It'll make more sense as we get into it. All right, so our opening image is our very first beat of the beat sheet. This is our first page, our first chapter, our first scene, and this is really what's going to set the tone, style, and mood of the story. As I said, as I like to say, if you're writing a comedy, this should be a funny scene. If you're writing a thriller, make it thrilling, etc. Notice I've put these as check boxes instead of bullet points because these are things you want to check off as you're revising your novel. You want to ask yourself, does my opening image set the tone, mood, style of my novel? If not, maybe I need to revise that. The other thing that the opening image should do is provide a before snapshot of your flawed main character, who I've been referring to as the hero, and I will continue to refer to as the hero. It means, what do they look like before their big transformation? You can also think of this as the starting point of their transformation. What kind of flaws are they dealing with? What kind of problems are they dealing with in their life? We want to start with a flawed hero because it gives us a place to go. If all stories are about transformation, we want to make sure we have a starting point to transform from. So this is where we really show that hero and all of their flaws and problems. We also show, again, who the hero is, but also what their life is like. Where do they live? Who are their friends? What's their work situation? Or where do they go to school if it's a younger novel? If you're doing any sort of world building, we want to give a good glimpse of the world in which your hero inhabits. And even if it's not a fantasy or sci-fi novel, what is the setting of this novel? This all gets introduced in the opening image. You don't have to do everything here, but you have to at least hint at some of these things in the opening image. I always say that the opening image works best when it's visual. Meaning we're showing the hero interacting with their world. I love to dump heroes right into an action scene and then let the reader figure all of these things out without me having to tell them. That to me is really clever and smart storytelling. I love as a reader to be dumped into a story and just having to basically figure out what's happening, by what the hero is doing, who they're talking to, what kind of tics do they have? What kind of things do they like to do? All that stuff creates a very engaging and interactive experience for the reader. So we like to make this beat visual. So as you probably guessed, the opening image is a single scene. You'll see scenes represented as cards on this board, and we get one card for the opening image because it's a single scene beat, and it's the first card in our storyboard. Then we move on to the setup. As you see, this is a multi-scene beat, which you're going to see spread out on the storyboard a little bit differently when that comes up. So this beat takes up the first 10% roughly of your novel. I should say that these percentages are rough estimates. They're not set in stone percentages, but they're good guidelines to help you with that pacing. So in the setup, this is a continuation of the opening image. Basically, the opening image is our first glimpse of the hero. Now we want to continue to show the hero and their world and all of its flaws and problems. So these are scenes used to explore the hero's status quo life. That means the life before any really big changes come to it. So what does your hero's life look like before its epic transformation? Now, this is where we'll also want to add a save the cat moment if necessary. What is a save the cat moment? Well, it's actually what the whole book is named after, but it's a moment where your hero does something redeeming or something relatable that gets the reader on their side, like save a cat from a burning building or a tree or a shelter. That's just a very random example that happened to make it to the cover of the book, but it's not the only thing you can do to make your hero relatable or redeemable. They can also do a lot of other things that accomplish that, but Save the Cat is sort of the epitome of what this is about. So if you do have a Save the Cat moment in your book to try to get the reader on your hero's side, it would probably go in the setup. This is where we also introduce other supporting characters and the hero's primary goal. What is the hero pursuing at the start of the novel? It should be something external and tangible that the hero is pursuing actively. We can also call this what the hero wants or the wants. So I say it should be external and tangible, and what I mean by that is my hero wants redemption, not a super tangible goal, unless you give it a tangible quality, as in my hero will feel redeemed when they have murdered their father's murderer or something like that. Now we know that when that murder takes place, we have achieved that goal. Or if the murder never takes place, the goal has not been achieved. So we want something tangible that we, the reader, can understand when the hero has achieved it or not. That's what makes a very strong opening goal. This is also a chance to show more of your world if you're doing some more world building. And essentially what we're doing in the setup is we're demonstrating why this hero and or this world needs to change, while also hinting at the stakes should the hero not change. That's why we're riddling this setup beat with lots of problems. We want to show that change is imperative for this hero. Otherwise, why are we reading this story? What's the urgency to keep going? If nothing needs to happen or change in your hero's life, the reader's not going to feel very compelled to keep reading because the hero's life is already pretty good. So why do we even care about it? So all this is done through the setup beat by basically checking all of these other boxes. So what does that look like on our storyboard? Well, it looks like this. We're going to have a setup and we're going to have multiple scenes under the setup. Now, note, I put 6 cards here. It doesn't have to be 6 cards. A lot of people want to know how many scenes are in the setup. It's really as many scenes as it takes to do the work you want to do. And that's why we have those rough percentages that it should be about 10% of your novel. This could be 20 scenes. This could be 3 scenes. It depends on how long your scenes are, how long your book is, and how much work you have set to do in the setup. All right, now, somewhere within the setup, so that's why you see it as a single scene beat at 5%, we have a beat called the theme stated. So somewhere within that first 10% of the novel, we have a statement being made by a secondary character that hints at what the hero's transformation will be. This is what we mean in the Save the Cat language by the theme stated. The theme is essentially what your hero needs to learn in order to transform by the end of the story. And we want someone to hint at it up front because it plants a nice little subtle clue in the reader's mind that this is what this story is going to be about. This is the path we're on. This is the road we're on. We don't want to spell it out entirely. We don't want to hit the reader over the head with it. We just want to gently place it there and move on. That little seed will continue to grow with whether the reader knows it or not, but it will continue to grow. And as you build your story arc, as you continue to write your beats and your reader continues to read, that seed is going to be still in there, kind of guiding them almost subconsciously in the hero's journey. So what the hero must learn, discover, overcome by the end of the story is another way to say what your hero's transformation will be. And now it's usually related to a flaw or fear that must be conquered. Not always, but that's usually the case. This can also be referred to as a life lesson, if that feels like a better term for you. So as I said, it comes somewhere within the setup. You see it's a single scene, and it comes within the setup beat. All right. Now we've established the status quo world with our opening image and our setup. Now it's time to take a wrecking ball and crash right through the status quo world. And that brings us to the beat called the catalyst. It's a single scene beat that happens around the 10% mark, and it basically puts an end to the setup. It is an inciting incident or life-changing event that catapults the hero into a new world or a new way of thinking. So it's an action beat that's big enough to prevent the hero from returning to the status quo life. I love this checkbox here because this is what allows me to check if my catalyst is effective. I ask the question, can my hero return to their status quo world after this has happened? Like, can they just go back to doing what they were doing before and living the way they were living before? If the answer is yes, then the catalyst is not big enough. And the reason we want that really big catalyst that the hero cannot return back to status quo from is to give it a really organic reason for the hero to move forward. If your catalyst is the thing that pushes your hero forward, it will feel like a natural progression to the rest of the story. If it doesn't feel big enough, and then you still move your hero forward, it will feel forced and contrived, and the reader will pick up on that. So that's a great question to ask yourself. Can my hero return to the status quo life after this? My best example is to quote The Hunger Games. After Rue is picked for the Hunger Games. Sorry, not Rue. Prim. After Prim is picked for the Hunger Games, it's not like Katniss can just go, all right, good luck in the Hunger Games, Prim. I'm going back to hunt with Gale in the woods and pretend this never happened. That's probably not going to happen. So that is a great example of a catalyst that cannot come back from. You cannot come back from. So some good examples are breakups, deaths, firings, attacks, or invitations are a popular choice. These are all things that are very hard to recover from. Okay, so our catalyst, as you see, a single scene beat that marks the end of the setup. And the catalyst brings us into the debate. This is a multi-scene beat, 10% of your novel, roughly. And these are multiple scenes or chapters that are spent where the hero is reacting to what happened in the catalyst. Heroes often don't just make decisions right away as soon as the catalyst is dropped. They often need time to think about it, to hem and haw, to weigh the options, the pros and cons. So this is where this would happen. The hero essentially debates what they're going to do next. It's usually presented in the form of a question like, should I go? What do I do now? Am I ready? What does this mean? What do I need to do to get ready? That brings us to, it can also be a preparation section. So maybe your hero knows exactly what to do after the catalyst. They know exactly where they need to go, but can they go right away? Or is there something they need to do first? Do they need to say their goodbyes? Do they need to pack their things, map their route, whatever it is? This is a great way to ease your reader into the next beat and the next part of the story in a more organic way. Something needs to be prepared or debated before we can move on to Act 2. So yeah, the purpose of this beat is to show your hero's reluctance to change and make the upcoming decision feel realistic. If your hero just jumps right into a decision without any weighing of the pros and cons, without any debating or preparing, it might feel a little unrealistic that they're willing to do this so easily. And if they are willing to do this so easily, maybe go back and look at your setup and set up a little bit more problems and flaws that might make this decision a little bit harder or more complicated. So as you can see here, again, it's represented by a group of cards, not necessarily the number of scenes you need, but it's multiple scenes of debate that happen in order to get us to the next beat. So once your hero has debated and effectively now they know what they need to do, that's what brings us to their big decision or their big moment of change. It is the break into two. It is a single scene beat at around the 20% mark that, as you can see, marks the dividing line between Act 1 and Act 2. It's a threshold beat because this is the moment when the hero decides to accept the call to action or leave their comfort zone or try something new or all of the above. Essentially, they are going to be venturing into a new world or a new way of thinking. Note that heroes don't have to leave their current world, town, city, whatever, in order to do something new or break into two. They just need to try something new or try a new way of being or approaching life. So it's a proactive beat that separates the status quo world of Act 1 from the upside down world of Act 2. Because we're entering a new world, this is often where a new or modified goal is introduced. So we had that starting goal that we set up in the setup beat. Now, that goal may stay the same throughout the whole story, or it may be changed. This is often a place where the goal is changed. And I say modified because sometimes the hero just has a new way of approaching the goal. Maybe the goal is exactly the same, like they want to, go find their father, and that's been the beat from the beginning, the goal from the beginning. The catalyst is that they find information about who their father is. Now they have this decision of whether or not they're going to go find the father. And then in the break into two, they decide they are going to, but now they have a plan on how to do it. So that's just a modification of the goal. Or there might be a completely new goal introduced here as well. but it's something that the hero will pursue throughout the first half of Act Two. So for a good portion of the novel, this is what your hero will pursue. I can't stress strongly enough how important it is to have a goal at the break into two. I find that most times when people have problems writing or revising their Act Two, it's because they haven't set up a very clear, tangible goal at this beat, because that goal is going to guide the next part of the story, and it's really going to give your story momentum as you go into Act Two. So if you're having problems in your Act Two revision, come back to this beat and ask if you've checked that box of whether or not a new or modified goal has been introduced. All right, so I've put it at the end of Act One here. You could also put it at the beginning of Act Two because it's that threshold beat. But the important thing to note here is it's that single scene where the hero takes action. Okay, now that we're in Act Two, it's time to introduce some new people. Here we have a beat called the B story. It's a single scene beat that's roughly 22%. It's basically once you enter Act Two, introduce your B story character. This is the introduction of a new character who we call the B story character, and they will ultimately help the hero learn the theme or lesson. Now, in Save the Cat terms, we call the B story the sort of the internal story. It's the story that's more about the theme or the life lesson that needs to be learned. Well, the A story, we call that the external story. It's the stuff that's happening on the outside. It's that goal that the hero is pursuing. But along the route, along the goal, they're going to have internal changes as well. What brings about those internal changes, and how do we represent that a little bit more visually for our readers? Well, we have characters who represent that internal story. So here's where we introduce a character who's going to ultimately help your hero learn that theme or life lesson, and we call them the B story character. So the character represents the B story in the novel, so that also means representing the internal story. Now, this can come in lots of different ways. It's the most obvious thing you might think of as a mentor, because they're sort of helping the hero along their internal journey. That's not always the case. It could also be a love interest who really challenges the hero, pokes at them, pushes them out of their comfort zone. It could be a mentor, as we said. It could be a friend. It could also be a nemesis, someone who really pushes the hero's buttons that makes them realize how they need to change by the end. Those are all great options for a B story character. Also, a sidekick is a good option, or something else. So you can have more than one B story character. This is something I get asked a lot. Just make sure that they represent the theme in different ways. Otherwise, why do you need both characters if they're serving the same purpose? And as I said, there'll be lots of examples of these beats in action in that free starter kit that I'm going to give you a link to download at the end. All right, so the B story character comes roughly at the beginning of Act Two, a single scene beat where you introduce the character. Obviously, this character will continue to play a part throughout the rest of the story, but this scene is just where they're introduced or brought into the story for the first time. All right, now we're in the big stretch of Act Two. This is called the Fun and Games. As you can see, it's a multi-scene beat that spans 30% of your story. It's going to take us to the end of Act 2A, the first half of Act 2. So what happens in these 30%? Well, this is a sequence of scenes or chapters where the hero navigates this new world that they've chosen to enter. How are they faring in this new world? Are they loving it, hating it, succeeding, floundering? What's the general consensus of how they're doing in Act 2? We will also see the hero pursuing that Act 2 goal that I told you to set up at the break into two. This is why that goal is so important, because it's actually going to be guiding the trajectory of the fun and games. And most of the scenes in the fun and games will in some part be involving that goal and how the hero is pursuing it. So maybe they're making strides to achieve it, or maybe they're struggling to achieve it. And that's what you can track through the fun and games beat. We also like to call this beat the promise of the premise. It basically represents the hook of the novel, the premise of your novel. Or in other words, why did the reader pick up this novel in the first place? Chances are they picked up the novel because you pitched them an Act 1 hero in an Act 2 world. If you look at the back of almost any book on your bookshelf, I guarantee you will see a pitch about an Act 1 hero, a status quo hero who has lots of flaws, who enters a brand new world to try something new and that is the Act 2 world. That's the premise. So here's where we're delivering on it. We're showing our Act 1 flawed hero in this new upside down world where everything feels different and unusual, and they're out of their comfort zone and they're trying all of these new things. That essentially is the premise of most novels, is an Act 1 hero and an Act 2 world. If you don't believe me, just look at Alice in Wonderland. The premise is right in the title. It's possible this beat is only fun for the reader. That's a very important note. Just because it's called the Fun and Games doesn't mean the hero is having a lot of fun in this world. The hero might be floundering, they might be struggling to achieve their goal, they might be completely hating the Act 2 world, but that's fun for us, the reader, because we picked up a book about an Act 1 hero and an Act 2 world, and so we're having fun seeing the hero being pushed out of their comfort zone. And are you ready for it? There it is. Now you can see how long it is. Holy cow, that's a lot of scenes. But yes, the Fun and Games consists of most of the Act 2A portion of your story. So once we get to the end of the Fun and Games, we reach a beat called the midpoint, which is very aptly named beat that happens right at the middle of the story at the 50% mark. It is where the Fun and Games culminates in either a false victory, meaning the hero has been succeeding and or has achieved their goal at this point, or they're maybe close to achieving their goal, or a false defeat, meaning thus far the hero has been floundering in Act 2 and has not achieved their goal, or maybe even has lost their goal completely. Now, we call it a false victory and a false defeat, not a real victory and a real defeat, because, well, the book's only halfway done, so clearly it's false. It's not the end of the story. That's why something needs to happen here to raise the stakes of the story and push the hero in a brand new direction. This is another turning point that we're reaching here, where we're going to push the hero into a new direction. The best way to push the hero in a new direction is to raise the stakes of the story. How do we do that? Well, plot twists are a great way to do that. Ticking time clocks, like if you don't do this thing by this date and the time is ticking down, that's a great way to raise stakes. Shocking reveals, ramp up of the love story. It's why you'll often find first kisses, first dates, first other things happening right here at the midpoint, because it ramps up the story and raises the emotional stakes. In other words, it's a lot harder to turn back once you've reached one of these stakes-raising moments than it was before. So that's why we like to raise the stakes that really push the hero forward and in a new direction. So all of these things push the hero closer to real change, because as of now, they haven't really changed. They've tried something new, but they're still their flawed self. This is going to push them closer to that real change. So basically, the midpoint is it's no longer fun and games. Things are getting serious now. Because we're changing the direction of the plot, because we had a false victory and a false defeat, this is often where you'll find another change or modification to the goal that the hero is pursuing. So here we are at the end of Act 2A. Our midpoint is the end point. And again, it is a single scene beat that marks the end of the Fun and Games and brings us to the next part of Act 2. And that starts with the bad guys close in beat. This is a multi-scene beat that is roughly 25% of the novel. A little shorter than the Fun and Games, but not much. This is how you figure out what your bad guys close in looks like. If your midpoint was a false victory, or the hero seemingly won or achieved something, then because we're changing the direction of the plot, remember, this will automatically be a downward path for your hero, where things are getting progressively worse. That's how you change that direction. On the other hand, if your midpoint was a false defeat, where your hero seemingly lost or was in a low point, because we're changing the direction, this will automatically be an upward path where things get progressively better for your hero. Now, you might be thinking, wait, it's called The Bad Guys Close In, so why are things getting better for my hero in a beat called The Bad Guys Close In? Well, that's because regardless of path, conflict, stakes, and tension are always tightened in this beat. It always feels like the walls are closing in and things are getting more difficult for your hero. You could basically call it conflict closes in, because what are bad guys? They're conflict externalized. So whether you have real bad guys or the bad guys are the weather in your story or something else, This is when things start to tighten and close in. Now, and we also have something we call internal bad guys. Those are your hero's flaws that have not yet been fixed. That's the whole point of the story, was to fix these flaws, right? They're still in there. We could call them internal bad guys that are putting more and more pressure on your hero to change, essentially sabotaging their world and their story from within. And because of the midpoint, we often have a new or modified goal to pursue throughout the bad guys close in, as I mentioned before. So here's what it looks like on the storyboard. Multiple scenes that get us through, roughly the first half of Act 2B. Okay, now, regardless of whether you're on an upward path or a downward path in the bad guys close in, all paths lead to the lowest point of the novel. Something happens to your hero in a single scene beat at 75% that brings them to their lowest point. This works the best when it's an action beat and something is happening to the hero that pushes them to rock bottom. So there's often a failure to achieve a goal here or a loss of something important. That's where we get that feeling of all is lost. It typically also includes something called a whiff of death. Now, a whiff of death is like a hint of death. It can be a real death, like a mentor dies. Mentors often die at the All Is Lost, by the way. Or it can be a metaphorical death, like the death of a relationship. People often break up at the All Is Lost for this very reason. Something needs to die here, because either literally or metaphorically, because it symbolizes the end of the old hero, the death of the old flawed hero, and the upcoming rebirth of a transformed hero. So here's where what it looks like. Again, a single scene beat where this one action thing happens to the hero to bring them to rock bottom. Now, once they're in rock bottom, they're going to stay there for a little while. And that's why we follow the All Is Lost with a multi-scene beat called The Dark Night of the Soul. I have to say it that way. It's in my contract. No, I'm kidding. But it is a 5% long beat where basically the hero is once again reacting to what happened right before this. So it's another reaction beat where the hero takes time to process what's happened. If this sounds familiar, you're right. It sounds like the debate beat. We had the catalyst followed by the debate. We have the All Is Lost followed by the Dark Night of the Soul. And just like the catalyst debate was followed by the break into two, this will also be followed by a new way of doing things. So you're starting to see a pattern here. Essentially, this is what is called the wallowing beat, where the hero kind of wallows in their despair, in their darkness, in their low point. The hero should be worse off here than anywhere else in the novel. Why? Because they tried something new. They went into Act 2 and it failed. So they should feel even worse than they did at the beginning if they were in that kind of place at the beginning of the book. It feels like the darkest hour, but really, as the writer, that it's the darkness before the dawn. It is that moment where real change is occurring in that darkness. It's sort of a crucible for real change. And the moment before the hero finds a solution. And that's why it often includes what I like to call a Dark Knight epiphany, some kind of final clue or piece of information or realization drops into the hero's mind or into the hero's life that leads to a life-changing realization that's going to lead into the next beat. So as you can see here, there's multiple scenes in order to get us from the All Is Lost through the Dark Night of the Soul and into the break into three. The Dark Knight Epiphany essentially leads to an aha moment and a solution. Around 80%, there's a breakthrough where the hero realizes what they need to do. Not only to fix all the problems from Act 2, which there will be plenty, but to fix themselves as well, to complete that hero, that transformation that we talked about. So the character arc is nearly complete at this point. Once again, this is often where a goal will change, and we will often see the introduction of a new or maybe a modified goal that we call the Act 3 goal, something for the hero to pursue throughout Act 3. And just as the Act 2 goal was so important in helping you plot those scenes and revise those scenes in Act 2, the Act 3 goal will help give your Act 3 purpose and direction. So we see that, oh, sorry, a little quick. So we see that ending there, break into three is the threshold between Act 2 and Act 3 that's going to lead us into Act 3. Once we get into Act 3, we have a multi-scene beat in which the hero gets to enact the decision they made at the break into 3. We call this beat the finale. If the break into 3 was the decision to act, then the finale is the implementation of that decision. So the hero must prove they really have learned the theme by enacting the plan or goal they came up with at the break into 3. And we get multiple scenes to do that. In those scenes, the bad guys need to be destroyed eventually, the flaws need to be conquered eventually, maybe hostages are rescued or lovers are reunited or whatever else needs to be fixed. And this often happens with the help of the B-story character, if you haven't killed them off in the All Is Lost, which you might have. So essentially with the finale, we want to make sure it's not easy. It's a test. That's why we throw lots of conflict at your hero to truly test them. Have you learned the theme? Have you really found the solution? We throw conflict at them to make sure that they have and to leave the reader feeling satisfied. Some people call this the climax. I've heard that term before too. By the end of the finale, not only has your hero's world been saved, but it's usually a better place than it was before. And that looks like this. Finally, we've reached the final image of your story, the after snapshot of the hero. This is the end point of their transformation, which mirrors the opening image, which was the starting point of their transformation. This is where we're visually showing how the hero has changed after this exciting journey that you've just put them through. Again, it works best when it's visual and somehow mirrors the opening image. So we put that as a single scene beat right at the end. Now, that was a lot, I know. 15 beats, and what did I do that in? 45 minutes? That's probably a record. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by all these beats, please do stick around and get that starter kit that will help you kind of digest it a little bit better with some examples. But I really wanted to get through them quickly so I could get to my revision plan, building your revision storyboard step by step using the Save the Cat beats we've just learned. So our first step in this revision plan is to create a scene card for every scene or chapter you already have in your story. I like to stick to 1 to 2 sentence high-level description of what happens in the scene. So this requires you to go through your current draft, take every scene or chapter, if that's how you've divided things, and give them a 1 to 2 sentence high-level description so you know what's happening in each scene. Here's an example from my middle grade novel, Amelia Gray is Almost Okay. These were some of the scene cards I was working with in my revision. I had things like Amelia on her last day of school feeling invisible. Amelia tries to find an activity to join for the summer. Amelia designs her second reinvention. I know these don't make a lot of sense without the book, but this is an example of a 1 to 2 sentence description of what happens in the scene. Amelia and her dad arrive at a new town, etc. The next step is to start placing your beats on the story. Start placing your scenes on the storyboard. My tip is to start with the single scene beats first. They serve as an anchor for the rest of the scenes to fall between. So the single scene beats, if you remember, these are the list of single scene beats: opening image, theme stated, catalyst, break into 2, midpoint, all is lost, break into 3, and final image, or these. And as you can see, those are your anchors. All of those multi-scene beats are going to be strung between them. So if we can really nail down where these single scene beats happen, it's much easier to build our storyboard around it. So when I look at this, I see, okay, Amelia on her last day of school feeling invisible. That feels like a good opening image. It is my current opening image as the draft was then, and I think I'm going to keep it as the opening image. So I'm going to put that here on the opening image slot, and I'm going to kind of get that cemented in there for my next draft. Then I look at this one. Amelia's dad tells her he wants to stay in this new town forever. Ooh, that sounds like a good catalyst. So I'm going to put that on my catalyst, and I feel pretty confident that that is going to be the catalyst for the next draft as well. This one, Amelia decides to reinvent herself as 3 different people to improve her chances of fitting in. That word decides is pretty telling there. That sounds like a break into 2. So I'm going to put that in the break into 2 spot on the storyboard. And now you can see I'm starting to fill in some anchors on my board. Amelia meets Finn at the dog park, instantly dislikes him and his dog. That sounds like a fun B story character. So that is where the B story character gets introduced. So I've put that there. Now, if you're missing a beat, or you're like, well, I don't have a good catalyst already, or I don't have a good midpoint yet, that's where we start to create placeholders. And here we want to include in our placeholders any ideas we have of what that beat might be, or what we want to write there. So I like to make my placeholders maybe a different color, or a different, something to mark them as a placeholder, so that when I'm looking at my full storyboard at the end, I can see where my work needs to be. So I don't have a theme stated yet, so I'm putting that in as a placeholder. I also don't have a midpoint that I like yet. Maybe I had a midpoint, but I know it needs to be thrown out or redone. I'm going to put a placeholder there, and I'm going to fill in the rest of these things. I did know what my all is lost was, but I didn't know what my break into 3 was, and I did have a final image. So there's my anchors, there's my single scene beats. Now I can start filling in the rest. So the next step is to fill in the other cards between the single scene beats, which become your multi-scene beats. So those are your setup, your debate, your fun and games, your bad guys close in, dark night of the soul, and finale. So of the scenes I have, and again, this is just a sampling, I probably had more than this. Amelia and her dad arrive in the new town. That sounds like part of the setup. Amelia tries to find an activity to join for the summer. That sounded like a debate after she's just found out that she's going to stay there for the whole summer now. She's going to try to find an activity. And the rest of these I'm going to place in the fun and games. So now my board is starting to fill out. As you go through this process, you're going to have to brainstorm and create new cards as necessary to complete your board. And by the end, you'll have something that looks a little bit like this. Now I have a great snapshot of how much work is required for my next draft. By the way, you can do this for the 3rd draft, the 4th draft, the 5th draft, etc. Always building out the next draft of your storyboard using the beats. So I can see that roughly half of my cards are pretty well set, and I have about half of the cards that either need a lot of work or they need a complete revision. And now as I go through this, I can use this exact board as my revision plan. So that is how I apply the Save the Cat beats to my revision plan. And it is the exact process I went through several times for several drafts when I wrote my middle grade novel, Amelia Gray is Okay, which released a few years ago. From Random House. Oh, and it was a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard, so that was kind of exciting. Okay, as promised, here is a link to get that starter kit, jessicabrody.com/STC. That stands for Save the Cat, by the way, which I'm sure we'll get into the chat as well for you. This will include an overview of the 15 beats we covered today, sort of like a beat cheat sheet. That rhymes. Ooh. And 3 full beat sheet breakdowns of popular novels. I've also included a blank beat sheet template, which comes in Google Docs, that will help you create your own bestseller. If you would like some more free resources, check out my website, writingmastery.com, that I designed exclusively for fiction writers to help them reach their goals. I've got more free writing guides, like a revision kickstart guide, a first draft accelerator, a productive writer's playbook, and more. We've got blog posts, we've got in-depth on-demand courses and live events, so you can check out that as well. And now I'm open to questions. I left a little bit of time, but I'm also happy to go over time. That's fine.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica. Let me turn my video back on here real quick. And I'm just going to go ahead and drop in some links for everyone real quick, so everyone has all those. Just drop Jessica's there and some from Literature and Latte and myself. So feel free to check those out. Just a second here. And we'll jump in the Q&A, I think.
Fantastic.
And get this started. So I do see someone's asking, do you have any comments on applying this method to a memoir?
Yes. So I've never written a memoir, but I've read a lot of memoirs. What I recommend for memoir writers is to play with time. So it's essentially to kind of do the process we just laid out. List out all of the things you want to include in the course of your memoir that happened to you, and then start looking for those single scene beats as your anchors. Like, oh, this sounded like a really good catalyst. This is really what launched the whole story that I want to tell here. Put that in the catalyst spot. This sounds like a midpoint. and this really like changed the direction of how I went about my life. Put that in the midpoint spot. As much as you can, try to find the things that happen that match those single scene beats, and then try to fill in things in between them. Now, keep in mind that, you know, things don't always happen in order in real life the way that they do in a story. And that's when you have to start playing with flashbacks, with flash forwards. Those kinds of things can be played out in the multi-scene beats where you have a lot of time to explore themes and other things that happened. But I find that the best structured memoirs do have those single scene beats in place as anchors. So that would be my tip.
Perfect. Okay, let me pull up another question here. This one was from Claudia. She's asked, "Can you say a little more about bad guys close in and what kind of things should happen here?"
Yeah, so as I said, bad guys are an external conflict, right? So you might have bad guys, literal bad guys who are chasing down your hero, or you might just have a lot of conflict in your story. But essentially, this is where the conflict is really starting to pile up on your hero. And that includes internal conflict too. So all those unchecked flaws that your hero has not dealt with, those kinds of things are pushing your hero to change, or at least maybe sabotaging relationships, sabotaging their happiness. And that is kind of pushing them towards that realization that they have to change. The best way to kind of get a little bit more familiar with what happens in a bad guy's close in, because a lot of different types of things can happen, is to read some of those examples of the bad guys close in action.
Excellent. Okay. So I have Gary here. He's asking, is the midpoint necessarily the chronological midpoint of the story? So, for example, could the midpoint be a flashback that precedes Act One?
Oh, that's a
Any
good
thought?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I always say I'm always like, I don't make the rules, right? But I mean, you do what you want to do, and if it works, it works. Because every time I say no, you can't do that, then some giant book gets released that does it. Everyone's like, yeah, but what about that book? So what do I know, right? Um, I will say that if the flashback was something that the hero knew all along, then why is it only affecting them now? That would be my question to you. So the way just off the top of my head, the way I would see that working is if it's a flashback that comes unexpectedly at the midpoint and then changes the direction of the story, because that would really make it feel like a thing that pushes the story forward, as opposed to, well, I've always had this flashback. I've always known this thing. I'm only now telling the reader, which then made the reader feel like, well, why didn't you use that information all through the first half? So yeah, maybe your character has amnesia. Maybe they've been repressing that memory, and now it's finally bubbling up to the surface. Those kinds of things I think work great for midpoints to push the story forward, because those kind of things really raise the stakes. Maybe they see someone on the street that then suddenly triggers this, you know, this very triggering reaction that would push the story forward. In those ways, it would work really well, I think, personally.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Ronnie here is asking, in a thriller, the detective just solves the murder but doesn't transform himself. So how do the beats apply in this case?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In thrillers where the detective doesn't change, which happens very often in thrillers, somebody needs to change. Like, it's usually a side character. It's usually, maybe it's a victim. It's somebody who's in the story for most of the story. Someone needs to be personally affected by what's happening. Otherwise, the reader won't feel personally affected. The person who changes is, I always say, that's the hero to me, because the reader is looking to someone as their emotional guide through the story. So when you have nobody changing, the reader is going to wonder, well, what am I supposed to get out of this? What are the stakes of any of this happening? So for the example I love to give is like the Robert Langdon books, like Da Vinci Code and Angels of Demons. There's a reason Robert Langdon has a different side character in every book, because they come with a fresh new set of problems and backstories that need to change. Who changes in the Da Vinci Code? It's not Robert Langdon. It's Sophie Neveu, who learns about her family and has to come to terms with what her grandfather did and gets over this horrifying past that she had with him and all of that. So that's really who changes. And so I think of her as the hero. So I would just say, make sure that the events of the plot are affecting someone personally.
Excellent. Okay, let's see here. They're coming in quicker than I can can
I'm
keep
happy
up
to
with.
stay later too. I know I took a little while to get through everything.
You're just fine. Let's see here. Okay, so John is asking, could you give a couple of examples of themes stated? And thank you for your time and expertise.
Yeah, let me pull some from the book.
Look, there we go.
Uh,
Smart.
I'm like, oh, off the top of my head, great. So here are some that I mentioned in the book. In the Grapes of Wrath, maybe all men got one big soul everybody's a part of, stated by Preacher Casey to Tom Joad. And basically in the Grapes of Wrath, Tom Joad basically learns about common humanity. And that's stated right there on page 24. In Diary of a Wimpy Kid, mom is always telling me I'm a smart kid, but I just don't apply myself. And this character needs to learn about responsibility and taking responsibility for his actions. Um, any other good ones I've got listed here? In Pride and Prejudice, there's quite a long one. Pride is a very common failing, I believe. And then she goes on to explain, this is from Mary, the sister, why pride is found in all of us and therefore should not be judged too harshly. And essentially, that's what Elizabeth Bennet does through the whole book. She judges Mr. Darcy for being prideful. So it's something she has to learn by the end. So those are just some quick ones if you'd like to dive deeper. I've got a lot more in the book and the beat sheet or the starter kit.
Perfect. Okay, Joanna asks, can you have multiple heroes who go through all these changes in one book?
Absolutely. Those are really fun and they're quite a puzzle. They talk about one storyboard. Now you've got, like five
Multiple.
characters going through stuff. So the quick note to note about multiple heroes is my rule of thumb is if they are given equal page time, if they have a significant amount of page time in their point of view, then they need their own beat sheet. They need to have a worthwhile story arc. Because essentially what the beat sheet does is it just helps you track a compelling character arc. And if you're putting them in the story and not giving them a compelling character arc, they won't be compelling to the reader. So the beat sheet really helps you track those character arcs and juggle them. That being said, characters can absolutely share beats. A catalyst can be a catalyst for three characters or one character. A midpoint can turn the plot for different characters. Characters might come together and merge and diverge in the fun and games. But the key thing to keep in mind is how each of the beats are affecting them personally, because they're going to have different arcs, right? So you're going to have one character is on a redemption arc and the other character is on a forgiveness arc. And yet they both experience the same catalyst, but it's going to affect them really differently. So those are just some things to think about when you're juggling multiple characters, is how they share beats, how they don't share beats. And one other thing to note is that their beat sheets might be staggered, meaning you might not have like setup, catalyst, fun and games. There might be a little bit more of a staggering, like you might introduce one character, then the other one, it comes page 50 or whatever, and they're basically starting their beat sheet a little bit later. So that's something to keep in mind too.
Okay. Natalie's asking, can the B story character grow and change as well?
I think, yes, I think it would be great. It's like I would say like B story characters who change is like really good bonus. It's not absolutely necessary, but it makes the story so much better. Because if they're not changing from their relationship with the A story character, then they might start to feel a little stale by the end too. But you don't necessarily need to have a whole beat sheet to track them, but maybe giving them a couple problems or flaws at the beginning, which get resolved or at least looked at differently by the end, might be a great way to evolve your B story character as well.
Perfect. Now, here's another question. I think you kind of answer this a little bit in the Save the Cat Writes a young adult novel. Can you apply this on a sequel, or I would assume also a series, right?
Yes, absolutely. So I covered it a little bit in the first book.
Yeah.
And then I got a lot of questions. So the second book, I call it Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel, but it's also like the secret subtitle is plus answers to all the questions I got from the first book. So I have a much more in-depth discussion about multiple points of view for the person who asked that and wants to dive deeper. I actually break down, I think it's 3 or 4 beat sheets in young adult novel that is multiple points of view. So you can see how different multiple points of view are handled. One of them was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, which was one of my favorite books. That's broken down in the second book. But I included an entire chapter about how to write a series using the Save the Cat beat sheet. But it absolutely can be applied. The shorter answer is, that's not a chapter long, is that every beat should have its own beat sheet, but then the series itself should have a beat sheet that I call a series beat sheet. So you would have a series catalyst, a series break into two, a series midpoint that would be that would track the length of the entire series. And that's assuming you have one character throughout the entire series and you're not telling individual stories throughout, which would be more of an anthology.
Excellent. Okay. Stephanie is asking, can there be two catalysts? Like, oh, I just lost it. Sorry. Like a false catalyst, then a true catalyst that finally pushes the character forward. Interesting.
Yes. Those are called double bumps, and I love them. I love writing them. I love reading them. I always say, my joke is like some heroes are really sticky and really resistant to change, that they need two catalysts to push them. But whether that's a fake catalyst or a real catalyst, or you just have two of them to get them into action, a second catalyst is a great way to end the debate. So maybe you have a first catalyst that pushes them into a debate, and then you have another one that really pushes them into act two. That actually happens a lot. It's a common thing. I do talk about that in both books too, if you'd like to read more on that.
Perfect. Okay, let's see here. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to sift through the ones that we've kind of already answered, but just have different wordings here.
Thank you. I'm glad you're doing it.
Okay, so I'm not. This one says if you have two strands, present and backstory, do both need to each follow the beats? I guess they're having two like parallel
Yeah.
stories going on here. Go.
My favorite example of that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which is such a great book. He tracks two storylines throughout the whole thing. And then what you realize pretty soon is that the past storyline is informing the present. So what he does is he does do two beat sheets. I mean, and I'm not saying he used the Save the Cat method,
Yeah.
but when I analyze it, I see the beats in the past and the present. But what he does is he ends the past storyline at the all is lost, because then you actually realize that the break into three was the thing that started the present storyline, but you realize that at the end. So it's really kind of cool. And I think what I think is important to keep in mind as you're tracking multiple timelines that each have beat sheets is answering the question of how they're informing each other. So they should be kind of weaving like this. And where are they crossing? How are they crossing? Is one catalyst informing another debate, or is one midpoint, maybe to bring that other question back, is that the flashback that the person has at the midpoint that pushes them forward? Things like that you could really play with. It's really about making sure, yes, that they have their own beats. And the reason we do that is so that the reader doesn't get bored with one or the other. And the reader won't get bored if you're tracking a beat sheet, because that's kind of the blueprint of what works, right? So as long as both beat sheets are tracking some kind of arc and tracking a beat sheet, your reader will be excited to read either one, and that's what you want. But the really interesting stuff where you get to really play is how they interact with each other, how it changes the reader's perspective of one or the other. What does the reader know from the past that now informs how they're reading the present? And questions like that are always fun to play with.
Perfect. Okay. So I think we'll go about for 5 more minutes. Is that okay with you, Jessica?
Absolutely.
Okay. So just a couple more questions here. Ula is asking, what about subplots, like romantic subplots? So how do you handle, I guess, subplots with this method?
Yeah. So when a subplot is a romantic subplot, I usually find it in the B story. So it's usually the introduction of the love interest is the B story character. That being said, you can have multiple subplots, and we obviously didn't have time, but C stories, D stories, things like that can really help inform the A story, which, as I said, is the external story, the stuff that's kind of happening on the outside. The thing to keep in mind when you're juggling multiple subplots is to just always ask yourself, how is it informing the hero's arc? How is it informing the journey that they're on? Is it helping them with their goal? Is it hindering their goal? Is it helping them learn their internal lesson? Is it hindering them from learning their internal lesson? Is it creating conflict for your hero? Because that's always useful when you can get subplots in there that create conflict, because we all need more conflict in our stories. Things like that. So having a subplot in there just because you want to explore, this one relationship, but it has no reflection on what's happening in the A story or doesn't impact the A story at all, can start to feel like an extra appendage that doesn't need to be there. So we really want to make sure when we're juggling subplots that we are tying it back and connecting it to the main storyline in some interesting way.
Perfect. That's great. Okay, so we have here Jessica's asking, does every successful book need every one of these beats? And do the beats need to appear in the same general order?
So some of the beats kind of have to come in the order they come. Like the catalyst leads the debate. You can't have a debate until you have a catalyst. You can't break into two until you're reacting to something that happened before. So some of them really do kind of naturally follow each other. That being said, there are some beats that are slippery beats, I call them. They move around a little bit. Sometimes you introduce the B story character in the setup, and then they don't really become important until the break into two or until you're in Act Two. Sometimes I've found the theme stated is sort of hinted around in the setup, but it's not really stated outwardly until later on in the story. And it worked, so things like that. The midpoint is kind of the midpoint. It's what swaps the story. There aren't a lot of the slippery beats. There's only really a few of them. Most of the beats are there as a way to help you structure the story. Do they have to be there? No. I mean, it's sort of like I don't like to call the save the cat like a rule, because like I said, there's always exceptions to rules. I like to use the save the cat as a guide for when I'm having trouble. And I never have trouble really anymore because I use the save the cat beat sheet. But if you're writing a novel and you don't want to use the structure method, I'd say all the power to you. You do you, right? But then if you're reading through your novel and you're going, okay, this isn't working, or you're getting feedback like this isn't working, it's slow, that's when it's really helpful to have that blueprint to go, oh, well, it's slow because my midpoint is actually coming at 70%, so the fun and games feels too long. Things like that are just really helpful to help you diagnose problems. I'll say that. It's a fantastic diagnostic tool. But if it's limiting you in the first draft, put it aside. Just write what you're inspired to write, and then use it to help you diagnose and figure things out. I would say 99% of the books I read, I can find all the 15 beats in there. Whether the author intended that or not, I don't know. I'll never know, but it's kind of just it just goes to show that the beats sort of fall in there organically when you tell an effective story.
Thank you, Jessica, for that fantastic presentation. Before we wrap up today's session, I have just a few things I'd like to share with you. This Wednesday, January 29th at 1 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. UK, we will be having our Essential Tools for Indie Authors, How to Write and Format Your Book with Scrivener and Vellum. In this collaborative webinar, Catherine and I will teach you how to write a novel in Scrivener and to export your manuscript for final formatting in Vellum. And you can find that link to register for that in the bottom here, ready to go. So check that out. It's going to be a lot of fun. As we conclude today's session, I just want to express my heartfelt gratitude to Jessica, our guest, and to each of you for dedicating your time and energy to this webinar. Thank you all. It's an honor to support your writing journeys. I hope the insights and tools shared today empower you to elevate your writing craft. Please remember our commitment to supporting your creative endeavors doesn't end here. Our team is always available to assist you. Stay connected with us and be sure to check out our upcoming webinar series for more educational and inspiring content. Until next time, write on and stay creative.